Before fire, humanity drifted through endless shadows. Small bands of hunter-gatherers clung to caves and hollowed cliffs, surviving on raw roots, bitter berries, and uncooked meat. Nightfall was not rest, but terror darkness alive with the growls of wolves and the silent stalk of great cats. Without warmth or light, every breath carried the weight of fear. Children huddled close, mothers whispered comfort, and men gripped stone tools, waiting for dawn. Survival was not living, it was an unending battle against a world that never slept. A storm raged across the ancient sky, lightning tearing open the night, and a tree erupted in flames. For the first time, humans saw fire not only as destruction but as possibility. They circled the burning trunk, eyes wide with fear and awe, then dared to reach closer. Seizing glowing branches, the flames hissed and snapped, fragile yet alive, demanding care, carried in smoldering embers, fed with dry grass, guarded through sleepless nights. Fire became more than heat or light, it was survival itself, a force that turned prey into hunters, darkness into refuge, and humanity into something forever changed. The night no longer belonged to predators alone. The glow of fire pushed back the darkness, its crackling voice warning beasts to stay away. Where once families scattered into shadows for safety, now they drew closer, huddling together in its protective circle. Fire was more than light, it was warmth against the cold, a shield against fear. Around its glow, raw flesh gave way to roasted meat, easier to chew, kinder to stomachs, granting strength and longer years of life. Flames did more than cook food. They forged connection. In the fire's reflection, humans began to see each other not just as companions of necessity, but as a community bound by trust, hope, and shared survival. Shadows leapt across stone walls, flickering with the fire's rhythm, while voices carried through the night. Around the flames, hunters relived the chase, their words painting pictures of triumph and struggle. Elders added caution, warning of storms, rivers, and beasts lurking beyond the horizon. Wide-eyed children absorbed every detail, their imaginations ignited by the spoken word. Storytelling was more than entertainment, it was memory preserved, wisdom shared, and the thread that wove scattered individuals into the first true community. Night after night, the circle around the fire grew tighter, and a new truth emerged. Safety was found not in solitude, but in unity. The flame became more than warmth or protection, it was belonging. Within its glow, the seeds of villages, culture, and civilization quietly took root. As the great sheets of ice retreated, the earth unveiled new horizons, fertile valleys ripe for planting, rivers teeming with fish, and wide plains alive with herds of grazing animals. For generations, humans had chased survival across unforgiving landscapes. But now the land itself beckoned them to return. Nomadic footsteps began to circle back to the same abundant places where food, water, and shelter converged. These were not fleeting camps, but havens that promised stability. For the first time, life could follow rhythms of the seasons, not the chaos of endless wandering. The idea of settlement had quietly begun. At first, the shelters were fragile branches, bent into frames, hides stretched against the wind, stones stacked to hold them steady. They were never meant to last, only to shield families through a season before the hunt carried them elsewhere. Yet something began to change. People left behind more than footprints. Seeds tucked into pits, bones stacked for tools, caches of food hidden in the soil. Months later, when they returned, the supplies still waited. Counts that had been fleeting now held memory. Fire pits still bore the ashes of last year's warmth. Paths pressed deeper into the earth. Slowly, almost without notice, wandering gave way to returning. And returning became the first steps toward permanence. What began as scattered camps slowly transformed into deliberate creations. Walls of mud pressed together, stones set into foundations, roofs layered with reeds. Each detail carried the weight of planning. No longer torn down at the end of a season, these shelters stood waiting, silent promises that people would return. Over time, they became more than barriers against wind and rain. They marked territory, memory, and belonging. Families began to carve patterns into walls, to bury their dead at the edges of their homes, to shape the earth as if to declare, "We are here." In these acts, survival merged with symbolism. The world was no longer just a place to pass through, it was a place to claim, to hold, to build upon, for untold generations. Survival meant constant motion packs on backs. Children carried eyes, scanning horizons for danger or dwindling game. Movement was safety, the only way to escape hunger or predators. Yet in fertile valleys, something shifted. The rivers promised fish. The soil gave back when touched by human hands, and the forests offered steady resources. Slowly, families weighed risk against comfort. They dared to remain, to plant, to wait, to trust the earth. Choosing roots was more than convenience, it was defiance against uncertainty. In that decision, humanity discovered the strength of permanence, and the first villages were born. Out of scattered families rose the first clusters of homes, and within them, ties that lasted beyond a single hunt or season. Cooperation turned survival into community, while shared stories bound generations. These neighbors became something new, the bedrock of villages, where connection proved as life-sustaining as food itself. Before farming, every day was a wager against nature. Wild berries and fruits appeared only with the seasons, and the herds that fed entire groups often vanished over distant horizons. A sudden drought, a failed hunt, or a harsh winter could strip away the fragile balance of survival. Children drifted to sleep with empty stomachs, while parents carried the weight of helplessness. Constant movement was the only answer, yet it left no room for permanence, no ground to claim as their own. In this world, food was power, and its absence was humanity's greatest weakness. Change was coming, born from a seed. Picture a woman pausing at a campsite, her hands loosening seeds that slip into the soil. Weeks later, green shoots emerge where none had been before. What began as chance soon revealed a truth. Food could be created, not only gathered. Humans started to test the land, scattering grains of wheat, barley, or rice, watching carefully to see what endured. Farming was uncertain at first. Rains drowned fields, dry winds withered sprouts. But the promise was too great to ignore. For the first time, survival could be planned, not begged from nature. Planting transformed soil into more than ground beneath their feet. It became a partner, a silent ally in the struggle to endure as crops took root. Animals began to shift. Roles in the human story. Creatures once feared or chased now lingered closer. Wolves, drawn by discarded bones at the edge of firelight, grew bolder until, across generations, they became dogs, hunters, guardians, and loyal companions. Goats and sheep, once fleeting targets, were captured and bred, their milk, hides, and meat reshaping human diets. For the first time, people no longer followed herds, they kept them. Domestication was more than conquest. It was a fragile partnership, built through patience and need. Together, humans and animals created new rhythms of survival. With fields to sow and herds to tend, life no longer bent entirely to nature's. Shifting with farming and herding came a new possibility: permanence. Food surpluses freed families from the endless cycle of wandering, allowing larger groups to live side by side. In Anatolia, Catalhuyuk rose from the soil as a maze of mud brick homes. Thousands of people packed so closely that rooftops became their streets. Far to the south, Jericho grew behind stone walls, guarding fertile fields and the lifeblood of its people. These walls were more than protection. They were symbols of belonging. Trade blossomed obsidian blades, woven cloth, and grain traveled along new pathways, binding strangers into partners. From fragile beginnings, villages became thriving centers of stability, where innovation flourished and humanity took its first confident steps towards civilization. Farming and domestication altered more than survival, they redefined the human journey. For the first time, families stayed rooted, not just for a season, but for generations, shaping places that carried memory. Abundance carved out hours beyond the hunt, hours filled with song, painted walls, and sacred rites. From these still points rose new ideas, writing, tools, and the beginnings of law. All of it traced back to a single act, pressing seed into earth and daring to trust the harvest. Within walls of clay and stone, life unfolded in close quarters. Families gathered around the same fire, its smoke curling upward as meals simmered and stories were told. Tools were not possessions, but shared lifelines, moving from hand to hand. As tasks were carried out, children absorbed lessons silently, watching every gesture of their elders, learning that survival was a collective act. Privacy was unknown. Cooperation bound people together. These dwellings became more than protection against the elements. They pulsed with shared labor, laughter, and sorrow, transforming mere shelters into the living heart of community itself. As villages grew, survival alone no longer defined existence. People began to search for meaning in the turning of seasons, in birth, and in the silence of death. Within homes, graves were dug beneath floors, tying families to ancestors whose presence lingered. Painted walls carried symbols of power, guardians for the living. Firelight flickered across carved figures in stone and clay, their shadows dancing. Like spirits of the unseen, these rituals were not decoration, but devotion, binding neighbors through shared ceremony. Belief became a compass, guiding behavior, offering comfort and weaving spirituality into the rhythm of everyday survival. The stone walls of Jericho stand as silent witnesses to a world filled with danger. Beyond their edges lurked rival bands competing for land, wild predators searching for weakness, and storms capable of sweeping away fragile shelters. Alone, a family was vulnerable. Together, they became a force. Villagers raised defenses with bare hands and simple tools, each stone laid not just for survival, but for one another. Farmers tended crops inside while guards kept watch, their vigilance binding the community. The wall became more than a barrier. It was a promise of safety. Inside these enclosures, trust deepened, and loyalty to neighbors replaced the restless isolation of earlier times, forging humanity's first steps toward organized security. Within the crowded heart of the village, survival required more than walls and harvests. It required order. Elders, hunters, and spiritual guides began to shape decisions, their authority born from wisdom or strength. Work was divided with care. Fields demanded hands, tools required skill, and ceremonies tied the group together. These were not written laws, but unspoken agreements of respect and need. From this fragile balance, survival camps evolved into societies, planting the seeds of culture, cooperation, and shared identity. The first villages stood on uncertain ground, vulnerable to famine, storms, and rival hands. Yet within their fragile walls, something enduring took root. These clusters of homes carried the first whispers of permanence, the strength of cooperation, and the weight of memory. What began as survival shelters became blueprints for cities, cultures, and civilizations yet to come. With settlement came more than shelter. It brought memory. Songs echoed at night, rituals honored the past, and skills flowed from parent to child. Surpluses of grain, hides, and tools sparked exchanges, tying distant villages together through winding routes of trade. What began as survival grew into culture. These first bonds of tradition and exchange carried knowledge beyond walls, planting the seeds of a shared human story. Crowded homes gave way to towns alive with trade, walls rising to guard their growing wealth. Markets buzzed with exchange. Gathering spaces echoed with voices shaping shared futures. These towns swelled into cities, centers of invention, where writing etched memory, governance directed order, and faith-bound communities. Humanity had crossed a threshold. No longer fragile settlements, these cities became the enduring foundation of civilization itself. The choice to stay, to plant, to build, transformed humanity's fate. From humble firesides to towering cities, the roots of civilization lie in those first villages. Their gamble became our inheritance, a legacy carried in every society, every culture, and every city still standing today. The courage of those first settlers to remain rooted changed humanity's destiny when they pressed seeds into the soil, when they raised walls of mud and stone. They could not have known they were shaping the future. What began as fragile clusters of huts became the foundation upon which every city, every empire, and every culture would rise. The fire that once only kept away the darkness became a symbol of connection. Around its glow, voices carried stories, rituals, and shared memory. These were not just survival tools, they were the first chapters of human history, told from parent to child, passed like torches into the next generation. Permanence gave people the power to dream beyond the hunt, beyond the chase, beyond the endless wandering of the wild. With farming and domestication, stability spread like ripples on water. Villages became towns, and towns became cities. In places like Jericho and Catalhuk, the walls did more than shield people from danger. They safeguarded identity, tradition, and the hope of tomorrow. Here, humans discovered not only strength in numbers, but also the deep roots of belonging. From these settlements flowed everything we recognize as civilization. Writing was carved to preserve memory. Markets thrived with the hum of exchange, and temples rose to honor unseen powers. Art, governance, and shared belief were no longer scattered fragments of survival. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. The pulse of humanity quickened, carried forward by the bravery of those who chose to stay. And so, their legacy endures. Every street, every monument, every story we tell today traces back to those first experiments in community. From the firelit huts of ancient villages to the skylines of modern cities, the decision to root rather than wander still echoes. It reminds us that civilization itself was born not from chance, but from the daring choice to build a future together.